What's up, weirdos, and welcome back to another video. If you're new here, my name's Felicia and this is Toby, and he also likes horror movies. So today we're going to be talking about the 2018 film Hereditary. I've had a lot of people request that I talk about this movie on my channel, so let's do it.
Come on, Peter. There's your suit.
It's heartening to see so many strange new faces here today. I know my mom would be very touched and probably a little suspicious. My mother was a very secretive and private woman. It's Grandma. You know you were her favorite, right? Even when you were a little baby, she wouldn't let me feed you because she needed to feed you. She was a very difficult woman, which maybe explains me.
I recognize you from your mother.
What? Sometimes I swear I can feel them in the room.
Hereditary is a very complicated film to try to explain in a general plot summary, but I'll do my best. The movie basically starts at the funeral of the matriarch of the family, the grandmother, and her daughter Annie, played by Toni Collette, is giving a eulogy at the funeral. And through that eulogy, you find out a couple of key things. One being the grandmother being extremely secretive and sort of having this other life. And two, that their relationship wasn't necessarily the best. They weren't very close for many years. And you find out more about that throughout the film. After the funeral, you follow Annie, her husband Steve, and their children Peter and Charlie, as their family sort of unravels into this horrific nightmare throughout the movie. A lot of themes in this movie, such as mental illness and mass manipulation and grieving, are all extremely present in this film. And really that's what the first 2/3 of the movie is about. In some ways, the first bit of the movie is sort of filmed like a family drama, and you can feel the tenseness and you can feel the horror energy, but the events aren't supernatural yet. They're more horrific events of the everyday life. And that makes it very scary in its own right. And then you have sort of this third act, this big shebang at the end, a la Rosemary's Baby, which Hereditary has been compared to, which I agree with. You sort of have this final act where shit hits the fan and everything's insane, and a lot of the horror stuff happens simultaneously and very quickly. So there's two problems I have with this film. One I'll talk about now, and one I'll talk about at the end once we get to spoilers. But one thing I had a problem with this movie was the marketing. I think they really sort of shot themselves in the foot. In early screenings of this movie, they started to compare it to The Exorcist, which I don't think any movie should do, personally. Exorcist came out in 1973 when audiences weren't necessarily ready for that sort of horror movie. And so yes, there's instances of people fainting in the theater and throwing up and screaming and running out of the theater. And that's probably not going to happen with Hereditary, because audiences nowadays have sort of seen it all. And along those lines, The Exorcist was sort of a genre-changing movie, whereas Hereditary, I'm not so sure that that's true. There's a lot of exciting things that this movie does that's not typical of horror movies. But I think comparing it to The Exorcist and all the marketing, I think it sends the audience into the movie with their expectations just too high. And so there's going to be a lot of criticism, backlash about oh, well, it wasn't as scary as I hoped. But I think if they had left The Exorcist marketing off of this film, it would have been received even better than it is, which is a well-received film. It's really an amazing movie in many ways, which I'll get into now.
I just don't want to put any more stress on my family.
So I just want to talk for a minute about Ari Aster, and I think he is sort of incredible. This is his first feature-length film. Before this, he had really just done a bunch of shorts, and just that alone is such a triumph. This movie is well done. And everything from the lighting to the shots, everything is beautifully done and meticulously done. As I was watching, I found this comparison between Annie, our leading lady, who is a miniaturist, so she makes miniature models of the everyday life, and so has to take, a tiny paintbrush and make a tiny cassette and all these things. And that's sort of how it feels like Ari Aster directed this film. Every shot feels meticulous and thought out, and intentional, and I think as a viewer I really felt that. Something else I found interesting about this film was the editing. The editing forces the audience to sit in some of the most uncomfortable scenes for what feels like too long, but that's sort of like the human experience, right? And so you're sort of like forced to sit in that excruciating, uncomfortable place with the characters, and you really get that through the editing, and I think that's so amazing. Another thing I thought was really well done in this film was the clucking. Every great horror movie has like a thing in it that sort of sticks with you after the movie ends, and I think the clucking is really the thing for this movie. I think they used it really well throughout the film, so it sort of turns into this thing for me that when I hear that like in public, I'm just like, you know what I mean? Like, it's very creepy and very scary, and I think they really sort of hit the nail on the head with having a memorable signature of the film, and that signature is that clucking. It's well clucked. Now let's go ahead and get to the rating. So for the scare, I'm giving this a 4 out of 5. I found it to be a very scary movie for a couple of reasons, and the biggest reason I think is because they had different types of horror throughout the movie that sort of would get any audience member in some way, I think. Like the first 2/3 of the movie, as I mentioned, is this sort of slow burn. The human horror moments are so human, and they're so hard to watch because you would never want any of those things to happen. And then the last sort of third act of the movie, you get more of the traditional horror elements, but they all feel intentional and deserved and moving the story forward versus just like for the sake of being scary. Does that make sense? And they're scary, let me tell you. Like, there are some very scary moments in this movie, but it never feels like for the sake of getting an audience member to jump. It feels like the result of this horrible unraveling this family is going through. Now for the gore, I'm giving it a 3. There are a couple of scenes in this movie that are extremely gory and very disturbing. Like I said, a lot of the movie is sort of rooted in this like family drama thing. The gore doesn't have a lot of screen time, but the moments that it has are intense. So I'm giving it a 3 out of 5. And now for the cheese, honestly not much cheese for me. I'm giving it a 1. The only cheesy thing, and this is so small, so there's a scene where Peter takes his sister Charlie to a party, and you learn very early on that Charlie has an extreme nut allergy, and there's this shot of these girls in the kitchen making a cake that everyone's gonna eat while she viciously chops like 40 bags of nuts. Like, it's the most nuts I've ever seen in my life. And then like 2 seconds later the cake's ready to be eaten, and it's just like, well, what'd you do with all those nuts? So that moment for me felt like a kind of like, okay, we know she has a nut allergy. We know this is a big deal. We know. And now we're gonna move on to the spoilers. So if you wanna watch the movie spoiler free as I did, feel free to pause me, go and come back. But everything from here on out is spoilers. So the 2 scariest moments for me were the decapitated head. I just could not believe how long they made me stare at that head. And what was also interesting is in the marketing of this movie, it made it feel like Charlie, the daughter, was going to be a much larger part of the story. And she was in many ways. But in terms of actual screen time, she dies really early on. And then when they make you look at that decapitated head, it's like for a long time, and it's a lot to watch. Also because like you didn't know if you were gonna get to see it, because some time passes and you've already had to watch this like excruciating scene with Peter having to go through and like accept what he's done, and it's just so hard to watch. I really think it's all over, and then they show you the head and it is just disgusting. And then the second one, which I think is memorable for a lot of people, but it's Toni Collette sawing her own head off with a piano string. I mean, that scene is gruesome, and even especially for me, the sound of the piano string going back and forth is just like, oh god. Like, I was literally like this, just like, no. It was a really well done gore scene and ended up being important for the end of the film, so like, good job, everybody. Good job, good decapitation. Okay, and now I just want to spend some time talking about the ending of this movie. I feel like that's what everyone sort of has been talking about, and I've seen this movie twice now, and the first time I walked out of the theater a little confused and a little annoyed, if you will. So I was confused because I just felt like the movie didn't wrap up for me in a satisfying enough way. Finding out this huge heavy film with all these characters going on their own journeys and all these horrible things happening, it sort of ends up that this demonic cult has just been manipulating the family the whole time to make all these things happen, and it just feels somehow like unsatisfying to me. I was like, that's it? It was just a cult doing all this? Like, it wasn't like, I don't even know what I wanted it to be. It just felt like these characters had gone through so much and didn't get to come out on the other side, like no one did. And I just felt so annoyed about that. And even things like the lighting of the scene, like that scene is so like yellow, and the lighting of this movie I think is so beautiful, and something about that scene just feels very like dull and empty and not climactic, and just sort of a letdown. And so that's how I felt the first time seeing the ending. And I love the movie, once again, love the movie, just the ending I was like, ugh. And then I went and watched it again, and the second time I had slightly less of a problem with the ending because I was sort of tracking the demonic cult throughout the movie the second time I was watching it. But still, I didn't feel like it really hit me in the gut at the end. I felt like the whole movie was just like playing with my head and my heart and my stomach, and I was just like, oh my god, like the film is exhausting to watch in many ways because you have to go through so much with these characters. And then at the end, to just like find out that it was all just this group of people manipulating the family, I was just like, so what? I don't know. That's just how I sort of felt. I felt a little bummed about the ending of the movie, but I will say that overall, I thought it was an amazing film. I think it really does explore some things that horror movies haven't really done a lot of. And Ari Aster has made some really cool directorial choices that makes the film, I keep saying the word excruciating, but that's how it feels. It feels exhausting to watch. You feel like you're becoming exhausted with the characters. And I think that's really hard and really special that he was able to do that. And obviously, like, special shout out to Toni Collette for like the best performance ever. I love her. I love United States of Terror. I think she is such an amazing actress and is not afraid of being big physically and emotionally, and I think that really helped this film to have a completely wild actress that is totally unafraid of full expression. Was really important to this film. Really, I think the whole cast did an amazing job. Alright guys, and that's sort of the majority of my thoughts on the movie. I really like this film a lot. I think there's a lot of cool imagery, a lot of cool stuff about it. If you've seen it, let me know down below what you thought of it. If you haven't yet, please do subscribe. I put out new videos every Wednesday and Sunday. Hello. And if you have any horror movie requests you want me to make reviews on, just comment that down below and I'll get to them. Thank you so much and have a nice scream. Bye!